Hello again. Hello again, folks. Welcome back to the Flying Cloud Zen Practice Communities YouTube channel. I'm glad you're here. I hope you're well. I was asked to offer some thoughts on grief, and so I'm going to try to do that today. I suspect this will not be the only time that this happens. And so I'm going to just start with some general impressions and some general thoughts today. And I'm sure there'll be much more to say in the future. The topic of grief is very, very large, as of course you know. And I think it's important to know that grief is such a universal human experience. That means we have many, many nuances, many, many different layers, and that it's also kind of paradoxically highly unique. So on one hand, we have the fact it's universal and everybody experiences loss. It's impossible to avoid. We all have it. We all experience it. It's universal. Also, that each particular person experiences loss differently, and each particular loss is also different, right? So right away, we're into the lovely spiritual landscape of paradox, something that is universal and also something that is completely unique and deeply personal. I say that to start with because I'm no authority on grief. I'm not an expert on grief. I'm not sure there's such a thing. There are certainly patterns. There are certainly tendencies that human beings have that we notice when people lose things. And so it seems skillful to name those, to mention them. Not because there's a thou shalt around grieving, right? Not because there's a particular way that it should be done, a good or a bad, but because I think by naming some of the universals, some of the tendencies, some of the really common patterns that we see, it helps to normalize those things when we notice them in ourselves. Also, I hope that it helps to kind of depathologize grief. It's a big word, depathologize, but it's a good word. I like it. I use it a lot because we have an usually unconscious tendency, all of us, um, to make a pathology out of our experience, to make a disease out of our experience. In other words, to unconsciously label it as wrong or shouldn't be. I shouldn't be having this. I shouldn't be experiencing this. This isn't the way it is supposed to be. That somehow our experience is aberrant, right? And it's coming from a person who is doing it wrong. It's funny to name it that way. I hope when you hear me name it that way, you can feel, oh, right, yeah, that is something that we all do. We all do this. But I hope that you can feel in yourself, oh, that's actually incorrect, right? Especially when we're talking about something like grief. It's the most normal, natural thing in the world. It'd be very, very strange if it didn't happen, right? So it's more than just universal, it's natural. It's how one would expect to feel, regardless of what that is. It's what we would expect to experience. It's how things go, right? You throw a ball up in the air, it's going to come back down again. That's not aberrant. It's not a disease. It's not a pathology. There's nothing unnatural happening there. It's what we would expect. We might like it, we might not, but we appreciate this is just the way things go, right? This is just the way things go. When things come together, things come apart. So that's what we're talking about today, right? Um, and I'm not talking today about any particular type of grief. We most normally associate the word grief with the loss of death, the death of a loved one, the death of another. That certainly is something we all experience. It's a very common form of grief that shows up a lot. But strictly speaking, it's really just loss. It's somebody living through the experience of loss. It's somebody having the experience of surviving loss, is another way to talk about grief. I am surviving and living when the thing or the person or the experience or the time that I have affection for, attachment to, care for, love for is separate from me, right? I can grieve my lost childhood. I can grieve my old job. I can grieve my old neighborhood. I can grieve the loss of a friendship, whether that person dies or we're just no longer sharing our lives together, right? Certainly more tangible losses, the death of a pet, the death of a spouse, the death of a parent, the death of a child, the death of a friend, the death of a, right? Those are a little more easy, a little easier for us to grasp as, oh, this is grief. I understand how this shows up. But there's also a subtlety to loss. It's the autumn season right now. For me, as I give you this talk today, and I'm looking out my window here, and I hear from a lot of folks in this part of the country that they love autumn. Fall is their favorite season, and I tend to share that. It's a beautiful time of year. Here, all the leaves change and change colors, and it's spectacular fireworks display for like a month. And there's also an emotional complexity to fall because we all know why those leaves are changing color. They're dying. They're going from being right green, full of full of life, transferring the energy of the sun into nutrients that support the life of that tree, to leaves that no longer are able to do that. It's too cold, they're dying. And so as part of their dying process, the the color in the leaf changes, right? It goes from green to yellow, from green to orange, from green to red as it dies. So there's a bittersweetness to fall for a lot of folks. And I'm aware of that. Wow. Changing seasons. There's a grief to it. Summer is no more. What am I reminding us of? I'm reminding us of the fact that when we look really closely, which mindfulness practitioners do, life is constant change. Constant change. There is only change. So really, when we go way down, we pay very close attention to a moment and we kind of stretch it out. We go, oh, as things are constantly, or changes, the constant arising of and the constant leaving of, right? Strictly speaking, it's neither of those things, but we're not going to get super trippy and Buddhist here. We're just going to talk about it the way we normally perceive it using regular language. Wow, in order for me to be giving this talk, I have to have done the prep for giving this talk. The prep is gone. Now the talk is arising. In a very short number of minutes, the talk will be done, and there'll be time for something else. Can you feel it? If we're really, really particular, if we get very granular with our experience, we look really closely, we realize to say everything is changing all the time is accurate. And we can also name that as I am constantly in the middle of birth and death. I'm constantly in the middle of something showing up and something else leaving in the field of my experience. It's time now to make a sandwich. It's time now to eat the sandwich. It's time now to open my laptop and send off that email. Each of those discrete experiences has a beginning and a middle and an end. So grief is constant. As something is always leaving. Just as something is always showing up, something is always departing. If you choose breath as your object of focus in your meditation, at some point you realize this. Oh, this breath is unique. I can sit and pay attention to my breath for half an hour, right? 1/48th of my day, half an hour. And during that half an hour, I'm going to breathe many, many, many times. And when I pay really close attention to that breath, I realize each inhalation is actually different from the last. Slightly deeper, slightly shallower, a little higher, a little lower in my body, right? A little cooler, a little warmer, a little more ragged at the end, a little full. Each one has a slightly different texture, sound, smell, taste, right? It's part of the intimacy of the experience of breathing. It's why we've been using it as a meditation focus, meditation object, meditation anchor for forever, thousands of years. Every tradition does it. Oh, each breath has a birth and a death. It comes and it goes. It comes and it goes. It's not the same one coming back. It's not, oh, there's my inhalation, there's my exhalation. This is this particular inhalation, which shall go unnamed, and then it's gone forever. This particular exhalation, which shall go unnamed, and it's gone forever. Just like each life shows up, totally unique, has its time, disappears back. Right? Each wave shows up, has its moment, has its expression, vanishes back into the lake. So we're talking conceptually here. I know these are big, broad things we're talking about. Oh, grief is actually a constant experience. It's the backdrop of our experience as human beings because something is always leaving. Yeah, that's true. Conventionally, sure, that's true. And just like our lives are brief and impermanent, so are other lives brief and impermanent. Therefore, relationship is brief and impermanent. Objects are brief and impermanent. Therefore, our relationship with those objects is also brief and impermanent. Wow. 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 The advantage of talking big like this is because, again, it normalizes the experience of everything shows up and everything goes back into the water, and then it shows up and then it goes back, and then it shows up and it goes back. I'm using the wave metaphor of a wave being an individual separate thing arising from and returning back from non-separateness, right? We're not actually separate. There's no such thing as separate, but there also is separate, and separate things have relationships. This and your job, you, this person, and their job are two separate things, and they have a relationship that lasts a certain amount of time, and then at some point they aren't related anymore. And this person have a relationship, and they're separate, and so they choose to be together, and then at some point that doesn't happen anymore, by choice or not by choice, right? Our separateness relates and touches and expresses non-separateness. That's why we choose each other. That's why we relate to one another. It reminds us of something we're not usually consciously aware of. We're not separate. But we also are. And so we relate to one another. Right? We choose to be around each other. Instead of having coffee alone, I choose to share the experience of coffee with my neighbor. We get together and talk. Why? I don't know. He might have a deep need. We're going to share the experience. We can talk about our lives. An incredibly deep need to experience the connection, right? And we experience this with everything. We experience connection to an attachment to our homes and our furniture and our pets and our neighbors on the sky and our jobs and our identities, all these different things we have relationships with. So when those things change and shift, naturally we experience this idea of separation. We experience this loss. We don't normally grieve the end of a breath, but we do normally grieve the end of a relationship of some kind, right? It makes sense that we do that. It makes sense that we can do that. So what I want to leave you with here, there's a lot more that can be said. Obviously, whole courses are taught on grief. Hundreds of books have been written on grief. There's sacred passages in all of the world's scriptures about grief, right? But what I want to leave us with today is the idea of grief as being a precious vessel. It's actually a deeply precious vessel, right? I started by saying, hey, this is not a pathology. It's not a bad thing. I would like to think that's obvious for most of us. I don't think that it is. But I want to end by saying it's not only normal and expected, it's a precious vessel. It's actually an extension of the relationship itself. It makes sense that we still feel it, even when it is not there. There's a lot happening in the experience of grief. We are feeling acutely the loss of something that was, and paradoxically, we're also experiencing the continuation of something that we imagined was over and isn't. I know that's a paradox. My sense is that the heart part of you probably can feel that that's true. The head has a harder time with ideas like this that seem to embrace opposites, right? Generally speaking, heads like things to be either this or that. They like birth and death to be separate. They like something to be black or white. It likes it likes binary stuff. I get it. That's a good organ, and it's our friend for that reason. It does a lot of amazing stuff with that binary possibility. But this organ, um, the heart has a much easier job holding. It just seems to have a much easier job relating to things that appear paradoxical. I'm grieving the fact that we are no longer together. I'm also feeling the fact that we are not separated. I experience both as pain. It hurts, right? But the fact that it hurts is evidence of the connection. It's evidence of the loss, but can you kind of feel it? It's also evidence of the connection. If there wasn't connection, there wouldn't be loss. If there wasn't attachment, there wouldn't be pain. These are a non-separate experience, actually, right? So when we started today by saying grief is a universal experience, it is. And we went on to say it's an entirely unique, highly personal experience, it is. And so here's where those things merge. Because we know every relationship, whether it's between two people or a person and a pet or a person in their favorite armchair or a person in their job or a person in their breath, it doesn't matter, right? We're talking about human experience, so one of these things is a person. But when we experience loss, the shape of that loss is the shape of the thing that left. The flavor of that loss is the flavor of the thing that left, right? The sight, the color, the sound of the loss of the grief is the very same color, shape, sound of the thing that left. It sounds very, very paradoxical, but there's a wisdom too that someone's absence is the same shape as their presence, that we miss them in a very unique way. We miss them in a very unique way because it's a very unique relationship. Grief is an extension of the connection. It's a connection. Can you feel it? Grief is actually a connection. Wow. So now the idea of the person being gone doesn't stop being true. But when grief shows up, we're also being reminded something else is also true. Non-separateness. Separateness being true is pretty easy for us to see. Non-separateness simultaneously being true is much, much harder for us. But grief is its footprint. Right? Grief is the footprint of non-separateness. In other words, it isn't over. It feels like this now. It shows up like this now. Right? Yes, I understand it's over. We're not using this understanding of grief to deny death, to deny separation, to deny any of the emotions that come with this at all. Instead, we're actually inviting ourselves to get closer to the experience of grief and all of its emotional layers. It's a very complex experience, right? It lasts a long time. It has so much to unfold for us, right? The experience of grief. What I'm reminding us of is this is the footprint of the connection. This is actually the sustaining of the thing. Different, and yet here it is. This is how it shows up. Wow, there's something there. So we know grief from the inside out. If you are actively in grief right now, my heart goes to you. I encourage you to care for yourself in whatever way love looks like for you. This shows up a lot of different ways, so I'm not here to give advice. I'm here to remind you you're not alone in that experience, of course. You're actually sharing that experience with every other living being. But that doesn't invalidate, that doesn't take away the intensity. These explanations, these conceptual overlays that we do don't tend to help much with the experience of the pain that we feel. But I encourage you to know it, even if it's breath by breath, And just little bit by little bit, there's something precious about it. It is the landscape of your life. I don't like the idea that grief is something that takes us away from our lives and then that we recover from and then we're done and then we come back to our lives. That idea does not feel correct to me. It feels much more correct to say, this is now part of my life. Just like the inhalation is part of my life, and now the exhalation is part of my life. And now that breath is gone, and now there's a new one, and now this inhalation is part of my life. Do you feel the non-separateness there? The invitation to grief is a profound one, to turn toward something that we experience a lot of pain around, and we resist, and therefore we also experience a lot of suffering, of course. Of course. But the encouragement that I'm offering, the invitation of grief to turn toward, actually relates to a huge percentage of the human experience. If we want to know deeply who we truly are, if we want to actually discover ourselves as love, as awakening, as enlightenment, this constant invitation, this constant open door, is one we have to walk through at some point. And we have to really say yes to walking through that door many, many, many times. So we can practice relationship with loss, with grief, with impermanence, with things arising and departing in small ways on the cushion. Attention to breath, noticing thoughts, and now they're gone and they'll never come back again. We can practice it in medium ways. Oh, I still do kind of feel sad. There's a new mail carrier assigned to our route, and the old lady that I loved so much, I always said hi to every day, she's gone. Now there's this new guy doing it. Oh, I'm kind of sad. I miss her. I miss the summer now that it's fall. And soon I'm going to miss the fall because there'll be winter, right? Those small ways help us strengthen the muscle of attention and self-compassion so that when the larger griefs come up, we have some experience instinctively reaching out for our grief, being willing to hold it close, being willing to care for it, not divorcing ourselves from it, not pathologizing it, not shaming it, blaming it, wishing it would go. Instead, we begin to have trust in it. We actually begin to have faith in it. As a vessel, it's our life. We can trust it just the way we can trust our joy. One isn't more fundamentally true than the other, right? One isn't more fundamentally real than the other. One isn't better, spiritually speaking, from the other. We can reach out to it and be with it, because indeed it is precious. Of course it's precious. We know this because when we love somebody very deeply, and I hope that you have this experience or have had the experience of loving somebody very deeply, we know that when they are grieving, we don't love them less. We know that when they are grieving, we can feel a magnet in our hearts that draws us toward them. Do you understand what I mean? This is, I am drawn toward suffering because that's the nature of love. And when they are grieving, we move toward them. We instinctively want to move toward them. Not to rescue, not to change. Can you feel the violence in that? Nope. I recognize they're actually in a very sacred place, a tender place, a difficult place, a place filled with darkness and suffering. That is true. But when we really, really love somebody, we can see through the lens of love and go, oh, the place they're in right now is incredibly precious. I won't deny them that experience, right? I don't want to see them get swept away, of course, but I will be with them in that experience. It's okay that they're having it. I don't love them any less. I don't prefer them any less. I am drawn to them like a magnet. I will be with them in that experience. Of course, of course. We don't even think about it when we love, right? Because we recognize it's impermanent. They won't always be in that experience. Just like when they have joy, we're drawn to them, We love, right? We also know that's not going to last. It's impermanent. That's okay. That same sensibility we can extend to ourselves. We always use somebody else as a metaphor because we tend to have a harder time extending compassion to ourselves. We all do, right? So remind yourself of how you would treat a loved one. We would care for them, not again to make their experience go away, not to diminish their experience, not from a place of judgment or control, but instead the desire to connect, the need to connect, right? We can do the same for ourselves. The grief we're experiencing is precious. The grief we're experiencing is temporary. The grief we're experiencing will change. It'll change into something else. And the grief we're experiencing helps connect us to all other beings everywhere, right? Because even though it's personal and unique, it's also universal and in no way unique. Everybody knows what it's like to experience the grief. So if today is your day to experience the grief, if you're aware that today you're experiencing the grief, so am I. So am I today. You're not alone. I experience a lot of joy offering these remarks. I experience a lot of joy even talking about the difficult landscapes because they make me feel more alive, and I believe they're part of the energy of our shared humanity, right? Our common experience of being enlightenment in form, right? Spirit in form. So I thank you. I thank you for your attention. I encourage you to continue to inquire. I encourage you to pay very close attention to your precious life. And as always, the resources of Flying Cloud Zen are here to support you in whatever your inquiry looks like. So if there's more that I can do for you or more that the community can do for you, let me know. I'd be happy to connect you with whatever I can. Thank you again for your attention, and more to come on grief, I am sure. All right. Blessings to you. Bye-bye.